All right, everybody, we're on chapter 4, Death March to Cape Coast. Before we get started, Cape Coast, some of your questions in your packet may ask, where is the story taking place at the beginning? But this is, Cape Coast was a place in Ghana, a country in West Africa. And they have like all the stuff you're going to hear about, a lot of the structures and the places. A lot of these places are still standing in Ghana, on Cape Coast. So, and we'll watch a video if you have not already watched the video on CNN talking about Ghana and Cape Coast, and a lot of things that we're talking about with kente cloth and things like that is still being produced in Ghana. It's like a kind of an industry that they're still doing. So they started it, in the 1700s. The story takes place in 1738. I believe I misspoke and said 34 before, but 1738. And they were making it back then. They're still making kente cloth. So Roland Martin has a segment on his show Unfiltered, and he goes to Ghana in the year of return, and they discuss a lot of these things. So if you're interested to learn more about Ghana and some of the history behind Cape Coast, definitely research that on your own. It's a harrowing history and experience. So, all right, Death March to Cape Coast, Chapter 4. Mari lost count of the days they walked. Her neck, bruised and scarred from the iron brace around it, could barely hold her head up any longer. Her wrists and ankles were raw where the skin had been torn away, and insects swarmed around the oozing wounds. Her bare feet left bloody footprints upon the path, sliced by every stone and sharp stick she stumbled over. At first these difficulties bothered her, but gradually she simply felt numb. Quadzo died one morning, probably from his untreated wound, Amari thought, or maybe from his untreated sorrow, but she could not mourn his loss. She actually envied him. 7 others died during their long journey. Essie, the young wife of Makofui, first lost her baby, then her own life. Amari was sure she bled to death. Unable to control his grief, Makofui grabbed one of the leaders of the march and tried to strangle him with his wrist chains. How he managed to get his hands in front of him, Amari did not know, but before Makofui had a chance to succeed in killing the man, one of the others calmly picked up his fire stick and shot him. He was left on the side of the road for the hyenas, as the others had been. Amari had no idea where they were being taken or why. They just marched, prisoners in the land, so full of beauty and harmony that Amari could not bear to watch the golden sun rising in the east or the freely running giraffes and elephants in the distance. Occasionally, other couples of slaves would join their group. They looked with dead eyes at Amari and her sad little procession. No one spoke. Eventually, all the prisoners were herded together, moving slowly down a path that was becoming increasingly wider and more well-traveled. The dirt was packed hard by the feet of those who had passed that way before, and Amari wondered if they, too, had been coffled and shackled. Finally, one day, they arrived in a city, so much larger than what Amari had ever known that she stared in wonder at the huge buildings made of stone. The variety of noises, screeching monkeys in cages and vendors loudly proclaiming their goods from the side of the road, made her head throb. She marveled at the people who lived there, people with dark and pale and even honey-colored skins, black men and women who walked freely and laughed loudly, speaking in languages she did not know. White men walking arm in arm with black men with no chains on either of them. Mari was amazed and understood none of it. Some of the people looked at the group of enslaved captives with pity as they were marched through the center of town, but no one made any move to help them. In fact, Amari noticed that most turned away as if the miserable group were invisible. The air smelled salty and felt wet upon her skin. The little river in Amari's village had smelled of mud and of the animals that used it as a gathering place to drink the water. But here she could smell a larger body of water, something huge and foreign and frightening. Although Amari could not understand the language of the white men, she soon began to recognize words they repeated often, such as slave and price. Once they entered the city, she kept hearing them say Cape Coast, with great excitement. What is this place? She thought to herself. Why are we here? How will we ever find our way back home? Then she gasped. There was no more home. She had no more family, and for the first time, she began to weep. Amari and the rest of the captives were guided to a huge white building made of bricks and stone, larger than any Amari had ever seen or even imagined. The leader of the Pale Warriors barked orders to someone in a colorful uniform at a gate. Huge doors opened and they were led inside. The bright sunlight was suddenly gone and she had to adjust her eyes to the gloom inside the structure. It smelled of blood and death. She could hear terrifying wails that seemed to be coming from the walls of the place. Amari was filled with dread. The men were then separated from the women, and Amari's neck irons and leg irons were finally removed. She rubbed her wrist and couldn't help but breathe with relief. Nothing could be worse than what they'd already gone through, she thought. She was wrong. A huge stone door with iron bars slid open, and Amari was shoved inside a room with the rest of the women who had survived their journey. She thought she was blinded at first because the darkness was so total and sudden. The smell engulfed her next, the odor of sweat and fear, of body waste and hopelessness. As her eyes slowly adjusted, she could see women, dozens of them, lying on the floor, huddled against the walls, curled into balls. Some of them looked up when the newcomers were tossed into the cell, but most did not bother to acknowledge their presence. Amari trembled with fear and disgust, afraid she would become like they were, afraid she already was. Amari found an unoccupied place by the wall and sat down on the floor, which was wet and slimy. The room had no window, just a large hole near the ceiling for a little bit of air to circulate. No one spoke to her. Those who were talking among themselves spoke in dialects she could not understand. Only a few could she decipher. Amari surmised that women from many different tribes and countries were imprisoned here: Igbo, Ga, and Mandinka. She was amazed at the thoroughness of their captors, how they had managed to capture so many of them. Had they murdered the families and destroyed the villages of everyone here as well? The thought of so many dead seemed to crush her. She covered her head with her arms and barely stifled a scream. No one listened. Amari gradually grew accustomed to the dim light and looked around the room. She spotted a woman in a corner who was rocking a child who was not there. She sang to it and caressed it gently, but her arms were empty. The woman's sorrow was raw and palpable, like spoiled meat. Amari's stomach growled. She could not remember the last time she had eaten, so when the guards tossed some chunks of bread through the opening, she was grateful. But by the time she got up to get some of the food off the floor, the previously quiet women had already rushed past her and savagely fought over every scrap of bread. She ended up with nothing. Amari dropped to the cold, wet floor, bowed her head, and wept. A large woman came and sat down next to her and offered her a small piece of her own portion. Amari took it gratefully. "Crying won't help you, child," she told her. "This place is slimy with tears." Amari was surprised to hear the woman speak in her own Yui language. She wiped her eyes and said in barely a whisper, "I feel like a broken drum, hollow, crushed, unable to make a sound." "You must learn to make music once more." Amari was miserable. "I don't understand," she told her. "In time you will." Amari pondered this for a moment while she nibbled at the bread to make it last longer. "Where is this place?" Amari asked her. "Cape Coast Castle. It is a prison for our people. We'll be held here until they have captured enough of us. Then we'll be sold and sent into the sea." She breathed deeply. "Sold? I do not understand." "You were chosen because you are young and strong. You survived the long journey here. You will fetch a great price." "From whom? For what?" Amari asked in confusion. "Who'd want to sell me or buy me? I'm just a girl who's seen barely 15 summers. I have no skills." "There are white men who will buy you to work for them by day and amuse them by night." Amari looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "How do you know this?" "I have been sold before," she replied quietly. "My master, a fat white man from the city, grew tired of me and sold me to buyers who brought me here." "Have you been here long?" Amari asked. "Long enough to see one group sold and sent away. We were marched into the courtyard and white men bargained for us. One by one they were taken through a small door. I could see the white sand and the blue of the sea beyond it, but no more. All I know is they never returned." Do you think they were killed?" "No, they had value. They did not die, at least not physically," she added. "Why were you not sold?" Amari asked her. I caught the attention of the leader of the guards." She paused. "He sends for me to come to him at night." At first, Amari didn't understand, but suddenly she realized what the woman meant. Amari looked at her in horror. You mean he—" "Yes, child, it is terrible, but I'm allowed to bathe. I get extra food rations. I do not allow myself to think while I'm with him. I hate him, but I will live. My spirit is too strong to die in a place like this." Amari looked at this woman, at her strong body and kindly face, and began to cry once more, huge racking sobs of despair. The woman took Amari in her arms and let her cry, the only comfort she had known since that horrible night in the village. So here at Cape Coast, we see that the slaves were separated by gender. So males went one place, females went another place, and again, they were just herded in like animals. So they said she said that she saw human waste everywhere. They didn't have toilets or anything like that. During this time, they would have outhouses where you would go use the bathroom at somewhere, or possibly if you were in the village with a Mari, there's a place where you would go to use the bathroom that was away from everyone, by yourself. But here, that is not the case. You just use the bathroom where you can, whenever you have to go. No one's gonna come clean it. That's why you had that smell. They're really, really treated like cattle. And that was that's one of the horrors and indignities of chattel slavery, that they did at this time, was that you weren't treated like a human. You weren't seen as a human. You were seen less than human. So they didn't care if, stuff like that happened to you. So if you're in this place full of waste, there's diseases and stuff that can get, that you could get, and people could get sick and die, or, and they didn't care. They didn't want too much to happen to you, of course, because that was money, but they didn't care in the sense that, oh, we're hurting this person. So, and as you can see, this new woman who was comforting Amari has already gone through a lot. And she is basically being raped every night by this guy, and so she gets to eat and everything, but still her her own person is being violated nightly, basically. So we get to see some of the stores, and we're at Cape Coast, and this is not the end of her trials. So but that is the end of chapter 4. Next chapter we will go to chapter 5, the door of no return. So thanks for listening. We'll see you soon.